everybody. I can't believe it's February. I have been horribly neglecting you, but I have been extremely busy and I've been working a lot, and you can thank the great people at Harley-Davidson for the pending trip that's coming out to Europe in a couple of months, where I'm going to be coming to a country near you, providing you live in one of those countries. Couple of things that are important, so pay attention. Eventually, we're going to talk a little bit about Stalingrad numbers. We're going to talk about some strange planes, and a last-minute question I literally just got from a couple hours ago about the least bombed-out cities to visit in Europe. Going to cover those too. Now, important stuff. A bunch of questions that I'm going to answer for you that you've been sending me. On that note, now, this is how YouTube sometimes works in its infinite lack of wisdom. When you send a question and you write a comment on the video, sometimes YouTube does not like a word or two, and it puts it in a different bin. And I check all the bins. I make sure, as you all know, I try to reply or answer every single comment, and especially question. Sometimes they go hiding in the bin. And when I finally find them and approve them for publishing, they are somewhere in between all the other questions. And if I have not responded, it's because I literally can't find the comment or question after I approved it. So if you don't hear from me, please write my email. I will list it here below. Or the channel email, listed here below. You can always make it easy and go to lostbattlefields.com. That's where all the videos go up and are listed. And of course, there's also all my emails there. I sometimes check my Instagram. Don't have a Twitter. I don't do a lot of virtual media. I leave all that up to you to post my stuff on all the different media platforms, because quite frankly, I don't have time. I am trying very hard to get you guys a video every week, and I'm starting to plan my trip out to Europe, and we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. But if you have not heard from me or don't respond, please don't be offended. I want to hear from you, so email me directly so I get it. All that different spam filters around the world is just hampering our communication terribly. I do have one question to you that wrote me about a month ago that your mother left Germany with a whole bunch of maps over SS locations. Please get in touch with me. You could be sitting on something that's very important, or you could be sitting on battlefield maps. So yes, please get in touch with me on that one. Email, carrier pigeon, come over for coffee. Don't know where you are, but this is something I would like to see. Sussen. We're going to have to talk about my last video, my visit to Sussen, where I was very disappointed at the people at the tourist office that ran the museum, and we will not go into to that. I'm sure that needs not be. However, I did walk away with a place with, or did walk away from the place with, my impression walking away was verboten. Signs everywhere, everything's not allowed, can't do this, can't do that, and there was very little understanding or service from the people I had communicated with for months to come out there to film. So I went off into the woods because I figured, well, if you're going to be this way about Maybach 1, I'll go find Maybach 2. And I went the wrong way. It is a very large, very dense forest out there, and quite frankly, I sort of lost my car and had to backtrack for a while. I'm here, so I made it out. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in those forests, and what is interesting is the bunker complex I found. Huge indents in the ground, huge foundations, everything had been destroyed and blown up, but the remnants of whatever it was large enough that it would fit one of the bunker buildings of the Maybach complex. So that's why I thought that's what I had found, because they were neatly in rows. It might be a little hard to see on the video, but these were huge, deep grooves parallel in the ground, and there was a lot of remnants from both from then and from Soviet occupation, just everywhere. So I figured that's what it was. However, having gotten turned around in the woods, I went the wrong way. Willie set me straight. Maybach 2 is on the other side. I know where it is. And when I get out there, I will go there and I will crawl through the remnants of Maybach 2. A lot of it was destroyed after the war between 45 and 55, where they literally destroyed the bunkers to get to the metal, because there was a metal shortage in what was then East Germany. However, some of them are still there, the underground still there, still accessible if you know where to look. And as I have friends that knows these things, I'll bring you something that's interesting when I get there. But just letting you know, that was a thing from there. Also, I forgot to tell you that in all these different sites of high security, such as Hitler's Wolf-Lair complex, there was little token coins that you would be issued, that you had to show the different guards in the different sections of the different Sperrgebiets within the security zones, and within the security zones within the security zones, of which one of these you were allowed to enter. And I have a picture of these coins right here. Catching up on what was. Speaking of your emails and your recommendations, I love it. And I am going to go to Norway because, well, Uwe told me I should. And we're going to do a special on the Battle of Norway and how it almost turned the other way around, given the Norwegian army itself. And Uwe sent me some amazing photos covered in snow that looked really, really pretty. And having just filmed up in Milwaukee, snow is cold. Don't know if you knew that. I kind of grew up in it, so I knew that. That's why I fled it. But the snow in Norway is just gorgeous, and I cannot wait to come up there to see that. And also the last earthly bit of the battleship Gneisenau, the cannon that is on position up in Norway. Gotta go see that. And I guess maybe the Adolf gun, because there's one bigger than the one I found at the Muvik fort. Maybe I can get him to fire it for us. Anyway, so Norway is definitely on the plan. I'm guessing there's going to be at least a week in Norway for when I go to Europe. There's also going to be some time spent in France and Belgium and Holland and Austria, and a lot of time spent in Czechoslovakia. It's not called Czechoslovakia anymore. I'm sorry. Czech Republic. Stop changing your names every damn time. I'm a historian, so I just care about what they were called between 1938 and 1945. There's a lot of interesting things I have to go see and film for my series of The Last Nazi Secret. And I've been promising you the first 6 episodes. I'm waiting for interviews to come back to me from Joseph P. Farrell and from Igor Vikovsky. I'm hoping Andreas Schulze would get back to me. He seemed to have dropped off the map somehow. Rainer Kalash have sent me his final report on what he found. And there's a couple other authors I'm hoping to hear from. And interestingly enough, now, I love visiting historical locations. I have something really cool like the Maginot Lines coming up, something from Czech Republic as well. The battle places are interesting and they're fascinating because battles took place there. And they're definitely worth visiting and talking about. However, the more I've been digging and reading up on what other people have found as to what SS General Hans Kammler was actually doing throughout World War II and towards the end especially, it is a Pandora's box I did not quite believe was going to be that vast and, I'm going to say, complicated. There are so many classified doors when you start looking into it, and it is, I don't surprise much, but it is rather hair-raising, because whatever they did, or whatever he did, it was a big deal. It is a big deal today. Otherwise, it wouldn't be classified left, right, and center by every archive that decides to burn down if you actually get access to it. There's a lot of study and a lot of locations, and all I can do is go to these locations. A lot of authors have written about a lot of these places where secret weapons research happened. And we're talking about secret weapons research that you have definitely not seen in the history books. And beyond the nuclear aspect, there's also a marrying of the nuclear aspect with the rocket aspect. And we're not just talking about WW1 and WW2. It's complicated. So before I release the first 6 episodes, there's going to be a lot of episodes, and there's going to be a lot of travel and a lot of digging. And some of it I would like to do live to bring you all in and hear your suggestions when I'm on the ground. I'm working on how to do 2 or 3 week live broadcast from the locations, starting in Lower Silesia, going to the Czech Republic, going to Austria, I don't think we can do it from a Moscow archive, but heck, I'll write Putin and see if I can't get access, because they got something. I know the Russians got something. I know the Americans got something. And I know they actually went back and dug up what possibly is some of the most secret and important World War II technology records that ever existed, and they did it in 98, 91. And the people who did it, oh, that might surprise you. But before I let that episode out, I'm going to do a pre-episode to kind of catch you all up on where this is going and who is who. Because when I'm running around out there and crawling through tunnels and throw names and situations at you, it would probably be a good idea that I give you a little bit of a breakdown. And I know Joseph P. Farrell have written extensively on what the Germans were doing. And I know Igor most certainly has broke some interesting, fascinating stories. But there's a lot more to it. And I know a new book just came out about it. And it has some very interesting omissions that I will talk about. I have reached out to the authors of that book specifically because I would like an interview, because some of them were on the ground out there, but there's some interesting things missing, and we're gonna go into detail. I want to go into very much into detail, and I got a good buddy of mine, and we're gonna go climb some caves, and we're gonna try to see what we can find underground. Look at some stuff that you haven't seen and talk about what was really going on there. And anyway, it will come to you. I just want to give it to you right, because a lot of you have written and asked me for a PayPal and to do crowdfunding, and for this I might do that because it's a big deal. And if there's anyone who are very familiar with archives and FOIA requests, or any of you, if they're familiar with the Russian archives and how to process FOIA requests in the Russian archives, I would very much like to hear from you, because I need a little help in that department. These things have ended up scattered in different archives around the world, and I have some idea who found what. And if there's anybody at the George Patton Museum who has a copy of the Third Army's War Diary or Patton's correspondence at the end, the last month or two of the war, I'd like to hear from them too. There's a lot of threads, and I am just myself trying to tie them all together. What I'm basically doing is taking every research that have been on one hand published, and I'm going to try to take that step further by going to the locations spoken of by a lot of these researchers. And very, very important, I have gotten an invitation to visit Bergkristall, which is only open 4 days of the year. And I am very excited, despite the fact that it's radioactive, which is why it's closed, but that's not going to stop me. figure if I don't have any kids yet, then oh well. It's not that radioactive, right? But it is one of the most complete and secretive tunnels that the SS built towards the end of the war and spent a phenomenal amount of money building. And I'm absolutely fascinated to see that and hear how and what they know they're on the ground. I have a couple ideas what to look for, and Andreas, I really am hope you come out of hiding and have time to buy your dinner. We'll have a talk. Right now I'm working on the final touches of one of the Czech forts, Fort Stachelberg, right on the border between Lower Silesia and the Czech Republic. One of the largest infantry forts built in before 1938 in anticipation of a German invasion. Fascinating place, especially underground. Can't wait to show you. And also there's some of the Maginot Line forts I went to see to bring you. And yes, I went to Fort Hackenberg, like everybody else, because it's the one you heard of, but that is not the most impressive one. The most impressive one is, and you'll see in a couple of weeks, if you're ever going to go to France, or you're ever going to try to understand the Maginot Line, this is the fort you start at, because it has been completely restored. It is fully operational. Everything works. I got to play with it. I got to film it. And the organization or association that is running it is amazing people. And you'll see when the video is done. You're gonna go. You're gonna have to go. But it'll definitely give you a better understanding on how the Maginot Line works, which also makes you understand sort of how the Czech fortifications and bunkers were built and worked, because the Czechs had the French generals consulting when they built it, because the Maginot Line was generally built first, or still being built, and certainly had been laid out and planned, because it wasn't until 1934-35 that the Czechoslovakian government decided they had to start building a 1,200-mile fortified line, and I'm bringing it all to you. Okay, so you have also asked an interesting question. Okay, you all ask interesting questions, but this one is an interesting sort of personal question. What is my favorite war movie? I have to go with Kelly's Heroes. And if you haven't watched Kelly's Heroes, just watch it. Teddy Savalas, Clint Eastwood, Don Rickles, so many great names. Donald Sutherland. It was a great war movie. It was, and it had humor to it, which helps. It was a great movie with a good with a good sense of, I don't know, straight humor will be the word. And it was made back in the day when you could actually do everything practically, none of that CGI crap. So I got to go with Kelly's Heroes. And if I'm gonna go and have to recommend to you a straight comedy World War II series of silly comedy, the British TV show Allo Allo, about a little French cafe in occupied France, and it is all slapstick. It's all silly, really silly, and it's really, really funny, running all the stereotypes. And you know, if you're a born again millennial, you'll probably take offense or something, and suck it up. It's funny. It's almost like the World War II version of Married with Children. Recommendation of the week. So you have asked, George, what is my research method and how do I process the locations I go to? And you have to understand, when we start doing tours, it'll be a little slower so we can actually take our time. When I go to film, I try to cover as much ground looking through the camera while sort of remembering the facts about the place. The way I do that is a wonderful escape from reality, and I can only recommend you all do that, especially these days. Stop watching the news. Stop. When I land at the airport or wherever I'm going, and I get in my rental car, or I steal one, I listen to music that I have fond memories of, good music. When I landed last time, I started heading towards the East Wall, listening to Bananarama. Old stuff, the good stuff, the new stuff's good too. Don't get me wrong. Love those girls. And it literally turned into went all the way through Wolfslayer, and I was listening to those Kim Wilde and Samantha Fox, and I think wherever we go, wherever I went, there was a piece of music. I did not listen to the news or the radio, and I barely checked my emails. And it was just so whenever I go through these places, this is the music I was listening to going through and sitting in the car going to and from. So when I go home and I edit, I'll put on that music, and that'll kind of bring me back to where I was, and I'll remember all the details for when I put it together for you guys. But I listen to music that I enjoy from time back in the day, and I stay as far away from reality and news, which is probably good for your sanity these days anyway. So yeah, that is sort of my method. I put on music. Same thing if I edit movies. I will put on, if I do a war movie, I'll put on great battle scores or Hans Zimmer or something that'll put me in a rhythm that will hopefully make me put a battle together that makes sense for all of you. So that's kind of what I do. So Dave was asking, and I'm pretty sure I alluded to this at some point. Do I think Himmler committed suicide, or do I think the Allies killed him? Now that brings us to a little bit adjacent of the last Nazi secret, and a lot of you asking questions that will be covered in the first 6 episodes of that show, which is why I'm kind of packing them away, because a little bit like Lenin said, everything is connected to everything else. I do not think that Himmler killed himself. Yes, he was trying to get away, but he also had in the back of his mind that he had something worth bargaining for. And it was only 2 days in a prisoner of war camp before he gave himself up. And in the transcripts of what happened between the British officers transporting him to the house where he died, it states that he had handed over his suicide pill, which incidentally is quite large. It also said that he was eating a sandwich in the car driving there, which is rather hard with a cyanide capsule that big in your mouth. So circumstantial evidence points towards the British killed him. Some circumstantial statements have been made to that fact. Do I have any proof? Nope. Guess what? When intelligence services want you dead, there's usually not a lot of proof. And you're not going to find a FOIA request to the opposite. There's too many reasons to not let Himmler live, and I recently came across another one, which was really interesting, and I'll dive more into that on the last Nazi Secret show. There is some evidence, circumstantial evidence, statements have been made to the fact that Himmler tried to kill General Kammler on several occasions. This has been stated by his grandchildren. And General Kammler is probably the most important human being that most of you have not heard about. And when I do a special on him alone, you'll find out why. But the Allies, more than likely, the Allies had reached out to him at the end of the war to do a deal. Because he knew where everything was. He knew all the secret research. He had everything tied under his cap. And he was probably getting a little bit too powerful for Himmler's comfort, which explains why he might have tried to have him killed. A lot more about that later. But if the Allies had done a deal with Kammler, then they really didn't need Himmler. Because there's very little Himmler. Himmler knew stuff. He probably knew stuff about Britain, about English. Himmler had sent a letter to Churchill at the end of the war that he promptly burnt. I don't know what he was trying to sell or do a deal or made an offer. But if Churchill wanted Himmler dead, certainly he could have ordered that clandestinely. And also maybe ties into a little bit to why Hess was locked up in Spandauer prison until he was killed there. And yes, I do not believe Hess, having arthritis in both arms, not being able to raise them over his head, managed to tie up a electrical cord and hang himself. Not long before he would be let out anyway. And why was Hess put under strict orders to never discuss anything from the war with his family when they were allowed to visit? Hess knew something that they did not want out. Now, Hess left before the war really got ugly, and he left because he was trying to make peace. And they locked him up for his entire life. I have some idea why. I think there was negotiations going on between the Germans, the Nazis, and certain members of the British higher-ups, possibly the royalty. I don't know yet. It's also not really something I've looked into, but from the people who have looked into it are quite certain that that is where that lead is going. And that means if Hess knew something when he left, Himmler certainly knew something. And that will probably be a good idea why Himmler was killed and not put up at Nuremberg, because if you think Göring could be embarrassing when he defended himself after no longer being a drug addict, Himmler certainly could have, because Himmler knew where all the bodies were buried and probably also where a lot of the bodies in the Allied countries were buried. It was simply too dangerous to have him sitting around being alive. So yes, I actually do think they killed Himmler. And Stephen sent me a picture of this thing and asking why is this some crazy Hollywood millionaire that bought a World War II bomber plane and painted in psychedelic photos that have anything to do with rock and roll musicians. No! Not that I would put it beyond anybody in the Hollywood entertainment business to buy a World War II bomber plane. I would if I could afford it, and paint it in strange psychedelic colors. Come on, Ozzy Osbourne? Hello, of course he would. Wouldn't he? Did he? Anyway, what you sent me a picture of is an assembly plane. And during World War II, you had these huge bomber formations flying out of England on the bomb runs to Germany. And we're looking at sometimes 1,000 bomber plane formations that would have to form up and fly in their kill boxes so they could render each other mutual fire assistance so in case they were attacked by German fighters. So you had the plane set up so they could mutually assist each other when under attack and return fire and defend each other, sort of like battleships around a carrier group just in the sky. Of course, Germans were no dummies and were monitoring all the radio waves, so when they started taking off to form up, they were doing it under radio silence. Now, if you're going to form up several squadrons of hundreds or 1,000 planes in radio silence, you need someone to guide the herd. And what they did was they colored these old bomber planes that had sort of run out their time. They colored them in these crazy, insane paint schemes so they were easily recognizable for the other planes. They also had different color flares that would be manning them so they could guide planes into different sections. And it would sometimes take hours for the planes to form up. But that's why you have some of these old planes in crazy paint schemes. That was actually something that they did during World War II that lasted throughout the entire war. And it's fascinating. Only the imagination stops you in how crazy they could do this. So I could see why you'd think this is a modern thing, but it really was not. and usually the assembly ships would have them for the bombers form up and then take off, and they would land and get ready for the next one. But there's one or two occasions where the assembly ships actually flew on the mission with the other bombers and went to Germany and dropped a load. Now, if I would fly a bomber mission over Germany, littered with AA guns pointing at the sky in a neon-colored polka dot bomber plane, I don't know, isn't that sort of tantamount to putting on a big streamer, say, follow me and please shoot here? I made it back, but still, it makes for some beautiful visuals of some beautiful planes, and unfortunately, I'm sure not nearly enough of them have survived. In fact, I couldn't find any sitting in a museum in the original follow plane scheme, which makes sense because there were old and tired planes that were used for this to begin with, so for them to have been the ones to restore or save after the war, you could see why that would be a bit hard. But they are cool to look at, so on this one, some cool visuals. Now, I got an interesting question about the Battle of Stalingrad. And I'm going to answer this question about why did Germany actually lose Stalingrad? Was it Hitler's fault, or was it just a matter of logistics, numbers? Were the Germans simply outnumbered? It is not that black and white. And I will answer this question only because if I am to explore every possible avenue and venue of the Stalingrad battle, we will be sitting here for a substantial amount of hours, and nobody is really going to want that. But did the Germans lose Stalingrad because they were outnumbered? Well, numbers certainly had something to do with it. Was it Hitler and Paulus's fault? Not necessarily. I will estimate that it was the German High Command and their priorities of replacements. Let me explain. I will give you a number now, and then we'll break down why that number is important at the end. Now, with all of 1942, all German losses on the Eastern Front was about 498,000. And we're always told that Germany was having a manpower shortage and had to drag everybody in against their will and this and that. However, the replacement for the Eastern Front was 509,000. So the Germans sent more replacements to the Eastern Front than they actually lost. So why was the 6th Army in Stalingrad depleted by 29 to 57% of their combat strengths when they were actually fighting in the streets of Stalingrad against a relatively small enemy? Suikov's army defending Stalingrad was about 54,000. However, the gap in replacements in Paulus's 6th Army was 56,000 that had not been replaced. So actually, Paulus was missing more than the army defending Stalingrad. That was only defending some 10%. Of course, Suikov was only being given drips and drabs as well by the Soviet Stavka, just enough to hold the Germans there while they were building up for a counterattack. That's the Russian side. I'm going to leave that alone for now. But if Paulus had been given just enough to replenish his losses from July and August, I believe he could have taken Stalingrad. And this is just the 6th Army. There's all the other armies that have been depleted in Reich's Army Group B as well. Let's break down how this all started. At the opening of Barbarossa, you had 3 army groups: North, Center, and South. In 1942, the focus of the battle, of the main thrust, was towards the oil fields and the Carpathians by the South, by Army Group South. Now, that should then, inevitably, been the main focus of logistics and support, and everything else should be heading to Army Group South to support that drive. Now, Army Group South was then divided up in 2. and Army Group A under von List, and he was chasing the oil, and he was going far, and initially had Hoth's 4th Panzer Army under him. And then you had Army Group B under von Buck that was pretty much delegated to a screening force for Army Group A. Thus, Army Group B did not receive a whole lot and enough of its supplies, support, logistics, and replacements because it was possibly viewed as just a defensive army that wasn't supposed to do anything except sit there. Now, Army Group B, between Voronezh and Stalingrad, also had a little bit of help from other armies. So now you could say that Army Group B, that had the task of screening all the way up to Voronezh, down to Stalingrad, was a bit of a mixed bag since, well, besides the 6th Army fighting in Stalingrad, it had the German 2nd Army, the Hungarian 2nd Army, the Italian 8th Army, and the Romanian 5th Army. So it was not really an all-German army. And these armies had, especially the Hungarians, had repeatedly sent requests to the German High Command of shortening their lines in order to create a reserve fallback. This was ignored, and interestingly enough, and here's one of the things that historians a lot of times try to avoid, is Hitler had repeatedly pointed to the fact that these lines were thinly stretched and did not have enough armor or anti-armor protection, and they needed to be reinforced. Off memory, I believe he was sending for the 22nd Army to go reinforce the Hungarians. 3 months before the encirclement, Hitler had warned that these armies needed to be reinforced, and they had themselves called for such. Now, Army Group B had lost some 156,000 men in 1942, while Army Group Center had lost about 104,000. Yet, when it came to replacements, Army Group Center got 191,000 replacements, while Army Group B only got 100,000, which already explains the deficit of 56,000 men less than they initially started out with. Yet, Army Group Center got 91,000 more than they had started with and that they had lost, and Army Group Center did not carry the brunt of the fighting at this point, which is very interesting. Why exactly did Army Group Center, that was pointing towards Moscow, of course, don't know if that was a high command logistical decision to fuel them with more men than they needed and that they had lost, and sort of ignore Army Group South, and especially Army Group B and the people fighting in Stalingrad. Now, you even had the Hoth's 4th Army had to come up and help at Stalingrad because they were depleted and they needed it at the fighting. The fighting was at its fiercest in July and August, where the majority of these losses occurred. When you get to October, the fighting was dying down. But the replacement has gone up. Not to the point where it even remotely started covering the previous months of losses, which is an interesting and important note. Now, Army Group South as a whole only receives 38% of the replacements sent to the Eastern Front in 1942. And of the 104,000 that went to Army Group B, 30% of them went to the 2nd German Army up by Voronezh, so not actually directly involved with the fighting in and around Stalingrad. So literally, the fighting strength was depleted before they even got to the heavy fighting, and they did not inside the city, and they did not get to be replaced anywhere near the number because the replacement went to army groups that were less active. And it gets worse. In August, when the fighting and the losses at Stalingrad is at its absolute highest, when they are losing the majority of the 156,000 losses, they have 11 divisions withdrawn from them and sent to Army Group North and Center. And this was good divisions. This was the SS Liebstandarte, the Großdeutschland, and many of the mechanized divisions. So when they were losing the most, receiving the fewest replacements, they had divisions withdrawn for other less active fronts. Again, one would say this does not make sense. Was this Hitler's or Paulus's fault? I'm pretty sure it's not Paulus's fault, because I don't think he would willingly have agreed to have significant forces drawn from him at the very height of his battle and losses. Now, it is said that these 11 crack mobile divisions that was taken were then replaced by 3 Italians with 8 more to come. But at the same time as the battle was at its highest, in August, 25% of all the mobile units had been taken away from Army Group South and sent elsewhere. Now, the main plan with Operation Barbarossa, well, was logistics. War lasted a lot longer than Germany had anticipated logistics for. And the main problem with the Operation Blau in 1942, again, was logistics. Because you had one army group that was going to go far, far, far beyond its logistical capability, going all the way down to the Carpathians, and the same thing with the Screening Force B. They ran out of fuel and had to stop for several weeks in August, where they had also had their 25% of their mobile forces withdrawn from. So something was definitely not working when it came to logistics here. Now the question is, did they have all these forces withdrawn because the high command said, well, we cannot replenish them, we can't fuel them and feed them, so there's no reason to have them there. Well, if you can't fuel them and feed them and give them what they need as combat strength, munitions, and fuel, you should probably rethink your battle plan. Or was it Halder again? Halder had misled Hitler all the way during Barbarossa, because Halder wanted to go to Moscow while Hitler wanted to go to the south and get the oil, as he saw as the most important part. To take the oil, take the breadbasket away from the Russians, and that will take away their ability to wage a war. While Halder said, take Moscow and the Russians will fold. Halder, somewhat secretly from Hitler, funneled troops to Army Group Center during Barbarossa, head for Moscow, which is what led in a clash between the general staff and Hitler, and had all these last-minute changes done in the heat of battle. Even Stalin said he thought Hitler would go south and was surprised he went for Moscow. But that's where Stalin had put all his main forces, in the south, because that's what he expected him to do. And now we're looking at a situation where the 6th Army could have taken Stalingrad if they had been proper supplied, proper replenished, and the logistics had been there, instead of taking away transport and fuel and ammunition, thus fuel ammunition, and taking and giving them less replacements for the ones who were fighting in the south. They took it away. They gave it to other fronts. So they literally had Paulus try to take a city with a hand tied behind his back, because he was constantly looking in the rear mirror for where his logistics were, where's his fuel, and where's his replacements who went elsewhere. Now everybody wants to also blame, that's a side note, the Hungarians, the Romanians, and in their fighting, they will say, well, you put these guys up in the flank and they didn't fight very hard and they just broke under the Russian pressure and fled. That is not true. The Hungarian army lost almost all of its commanding officers in the front line fighting the Russians. They did not have nearly anti-tank capabilities, the weaponry, to destroy the Russian onslaught, but they stood and they fought. They did not run. There was eventually a rut by Allied armies. When they're overrun and they have no more means of defending themselves, what are you going to do? But the whole weekly fighting did not hold up. They did the best with what they had. And of course, if they had been replenished and supported by German armored anti-tank units, as Hitler had requested, possibly they would have held out. If Paulus had had the 56,000 he'd lost, against Suikov's 54,000 in the city, he would have taken Stalingrad. This battle could have been over and won by October, or certainly by October, November, if the General Staff had planned and executed its logistics better. Same thing comes to manpower. That is one way of looking at the battle. There's a lot more aspects. But the fact that Germany could not replenish its losses, 42, is certainly false. Because, as I said, 509,000, so replacements went to the east, where only 489 had been lost. So more soldiers went than were lost, but they went to the wrong place, and they didn't supplement the main brunt of the fighting that was taking place in the south. And that affected the Battle of Stalingrad tremendously. Why? Another question for another day, and hopefully somebody who has all the relevant numbers might want to crunch them and try to answer why did the German High Command do what they did. I got the last question coming up. What cities should I visit if I want to see cities not destroyed by bombing during World War II? Are there any German cities, or should I just go to Copenhagen? I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I believe what you're asking is what European cities were untouched by World War II bombing, and thus looked the way they had always looked for hundreds of years, and therefore possibly more authentic and interesting in historians' eyes. Certainly a lot of beautiful old cities of Europe were destroyed during World War II, and let's not even start with Japan. That's an interesting question, because the cities that were, if you are, since you watch my shows, probably military historically interested, you may want to visit cities that have military historical interest or events taken place during World War II, which also possibly made them military targets and therefore bombed more than others. So on that sense, which ones were historically interested and not completely leveled will be one way of answering this. The easy way is if you want to take cities that were almost not touched or not bombed into oblivion and had to be rebuilt. Certainly the Scandinavian cities were less bombed. Copenhagen only suffered a few minor attacks. Same thing with Aalborg, and the beautiful old cities, and definitely worth a visit. Not a big fan of modernization of old European cities, because that's why I like Belgium. Even if you build new stuff, you still make it look like old stuff, so it all blends in. There are some Belgian cities that were fought in but not destroyed. And then there are cities that were completely obliterated. Like you had Hamburg was firebombed, Berlin was bombed, Warsaw was destroyed. Heavy fighting in Prague, but Prague is a gorgeous city. And yes, there was fighting in the city, and it was bombed at one point, but not destroyed. Prague is definitely one of the cities I would visit, especially because a lot of military historical stuff took place there. A lot of interesting military stuff took place there and outside there, and some of the great controversies of World War II took place there. And it is a gorgeous, old, beautiful city with an interesting underground. Interesting underground in Prague. Find some good tours or a good guide, because Prague is definitely worth it. You have a good mix there. You also had Nuremberg, which certainly was an interesting town, very much so, that was not that destroyed. If you want authentic German cities that was not touched or bombed or destroyed less than 10%, there is actually a list, and I will post it. Heidelberg, if you want to see, maybe you'll find someone to duel. You can also go to Lüneburg, which was taken by the British, and maybe you can find Himmler's body somewhere out in Lüneburg Heath. You had Celle, Flensburg. I lived in Flensburg. gorgeous. Absolutely. Visit in the summer. Regensburg, Bamberg, Schwerin, Görlitz, Gelle, Oldenburg. There's a lot of German cities that were not destroyed that much. There's an interesting note. If you visit the old towns that fell into the Soviet zone of occupation, you will find less modernization there. While now, when the wall came down, it was fascinating to go into the Eastern Bloc countries and see what things looked like, because they really hadn't changed much from 1945 to 89. And it took some decades before being part of Germany started remodernizing some of these former East German towns. Still today, you can visit them and get closer to what they looked like. Of course, they had been occupied, and some of them had been partially destroyed. The smaller the towns, the less they had suffered Allied bombing and total destruction. One thing is, if you have a battle and tanks shooting it out at each other, you usually they would patch up the holes, as opposed to when you have a 1,000 bomber raid that carpet bombs a city where there's nothing left to rebuild and you start from scratch. I can also, Lower Silesia, former East Prussia. I know it's all Poland now, but to give you an idea of the area, there are some of those beautiful old cities. Yes, there was fighting in them, but they were in Poland and have still not been revitalized, gentrified, or what have you, as comparable Western European towns have. So you get closer to the authentic feel and look there than you do in most big West German cities. You take Stuttgart. Stuttgart was completely destroyed to the point where they literally just piled up all the rubble outside of town, filled it up with dirt, planted some trees, and built a new city next to it. Which you go in the mountains outside Stuttgart. It's not mountains, it's rubble. If you dig down, you'll find red brick and everything else under there. Interesting, sad. There are some very interesting videos that we'll see if I can find a link to. I see on YouTube where you take the before and after photos, such as in Nuremberg and Berlin, and that's actually quite fascinating to see how some things have not changed and some things have changed. And the smaller towns, 100,000 and under, you usually get a more authentic feel. Aalborg is a beautiful city that has been being modernized to the point of annoyance, especially when they start ruining traffic. I don't know. There are certain political ideologies that seem to be based on literally just destroying traffic, on putting up stop signs and so on and so forth. That brings me to the last question. Not really a question. It is a lot of you have asked me for political you asked me modern, current day political questions, and granted there's a lot of things going on in the world today, and especially in the EU or in the US, that would be worth debating. However, I have found that, well, I'm not here to take political sides or express my political opinions, and it's hard to talk politics without expressing some sort of opinion. And I'm here for all of you, and politics have become so divisive that adults can't have a conversation about politics without someone getting offended, and next you know you're blocked or ostracized, or bombs start throwing them through your window. I'm a historian. I talk about military history, and I usually stop when we get into the early 50s. No one's asked anything about the Korean War. That's kind of where I would stop, because the moment we get into modern day politics or the roots thereof, nobody looks good. And if one day, if we're going to have a seminar with cameras, we can talk politics. But I'll stick to history because I think, well, interestingly enough, most of what the outcomes of World War One and World War Two have laid the foundation of everything that's happening today, or has happened, or certainly have created the groundwork therefore. So if you understand the European wars, the Russian Civil War, the rise of communism, the rise of Nazism, the Treaty of Versailles, its results, the Munich Agreement, if you understand what happened there, truly understand who and how and why and how people came to power and did what they did, I suppose modern day politics will in some way become clearer, and the direction of different parties will become easier to discern if you look at history. And that's, interestingly enough, in World War II era, World War I, they looked back and to comparisons from the 17th and 1800s, and the Vikings took lessons from the Romans, and the Romans took lessons from the ancient Greeks, and you always learn historical lessons that builds the foundation for the world we live in. And that's why I'm here, to give you historical lessons and to talk about history so you understand what have come before today. Because that's important. When you need to form your own opinion and your own thoughts, you always need to question and be inquisitive, and independent thought is so incredibly important. And I found that no matter what you hear or what you read, always read up on other points of view, on other historians can. There are things that historians will argue and fight to the death over. Viking tattoos are one, and certainly there are parts of World War II that are very contentious. And you fast forward till today in politics, and the word contentious doesn't even begin to cover it. But if you understand history, you understand more than most. And Lord knows, I really hope that some of the videos I do will resonate. And I hope there are teenagers we can bring into this and will be interested in these events. Because at some point in time, everyone in my lifetime, everybody who fought World War I and World War II will be dead. That is hair-raising. And the most important thing I can do is go to the places where events happened, talk to people who were alive at the time, read the accounts, listen to the stories, and pass them on. And fortunately, I can pass them on in video form, so hopefully this will exist for the next many years and the next generations. Because you may not be interested in World War II military history when you're 15, you may have slightly more interest when you're 25, when you're 35 and beyond, you start understanding the bigger picture. And World War II is not taught proper in any schools that I'm aware of, in any country that I'm aware of. And it should be, because it laid the foundation of everything we know today. I am so excited about the last Nazi Secret Show. I really am, and it's one of those, my pet project that keeps growing, because the scope and importance of what I'm finding and what others have found, it is profound, and it has far deeper ramifications into your life than you know. And it is a part of World War II history that has completely been neglected or ignored or miswritten or outright lied about. And you know when you have authorities that are not truthful, when you pass laws to protect lies. And when I say that, for instance, when Andreas was out digging in Austria, he found a site where there was radioactivity, and he found part of a cyclotron. The Austrian government subsequently said that it was part of a car, and then they shut down the site and turned it into a heritage site, so he's no longer allowed to excavate it. There you go. You pass a law that you can't dig a cyclotron. Hello? This is an important piece of history. But no, we're not allowed to. And that is the thing that frustrates me more than anything. After all these years, you have all these governments that are still covering up the truth. That is frustrating. But that makes it also challenging. And I like a challenge. And makes it interesting to go look, because there's stuff out there. And it's apparently still hiding underground, because every time somebody comes close to it, they just, no, not allowed to dig here anymore. I don't know. Maybe the trick is to not ask permission. Oh, that sounds like a bad recommendation. I would never say such a thing. Full disclaimer. No, never. Anyway, I'm glad I had time to sit down here and talk way too much and answer some of your questions. I have to go back and do some editing and send me your questions and send me your recommendations. And remember, if you're the Czech Republic or Slovak Republic or Slovenia, there's stuff out there I need to go see that's hiding out in the middle of nowhere. And we're going to have, yes, we got more questions coming up about Skodewerke and Pilsen, and I've talked to them. I'm going to have to do a special about that, and I think I'm going to have to go spend some time out in the Czech Republic more than I thought. So I got a buddy out there, although he's in Berlin. That's, well, we'll fix that, won't we, buddy? So anyway, I am planning March, April, May, depending. As soon as the snow is off the ground, I'm ready to travel if everything has come down the way it should. Hopefully March, April, I could be in Europe, and hopefully May, June as well, depending on how things goes. Before I go, I will get the first episodes of The Last Nazi Secret up, and I should be able to get all my last European trips up for you as well. And there you have it. Remember, if you don't hear from me, send me direct emails to militaryhistoryqa@mail.com or Tino Struckmann @hotmail.com. What the hell? We're all friends here. And please, do me a favor, share my videos. Because the more views I have, the more revenue, and the more funds I have to go traveling and find new stuff for you. I'm looking forward to seeing Norway. Looking forward to seeing Czechoslovakia, looking forward to coming back to Poland, and there's great people. I have to go buy a whole lot of food out in France, and Fort Cassel, and Ebenemal. I hope you guys are ready for me coming back, because I'm coming, so just get with it. And some of the nuclear rockets. Oh, nuclear rocket sites, and did I say that? Oh, didn't mean to let it slip. Toodles.